Hello friends and enemies, it's me Isabel here from Happy For Now, and I'm so excited to share with you all of my reading stats for 2022. So if you're new here, I keep a reading spreadsheet and a Google form that feeds into that spreadsheet. I didn't do a setup video this year, but I did one last year. I'll link to it down below if you're curious to see my setup. Last year I used Brock from Let's Read spreadsheet that I mashed together with Allie from Hardback Hoarders spreadsheet. And this year, Allie did decide to sell her spreadsheet and I gave her $5 to get that, and then I also made my Google form the same and fed everything in. But beyond the point, let's dive in. All of my charts and graphs are going to be from that spreadsheet, and the data's pretty accurate. There's a couple books I didn't add page counts for because they were only on audio, and there's a couple books missing, but my total read on my spreadsheet to my Goodreads is slightly different, but I'm okay with that because honestly, it happens. Total books read in 2022 were 360, which I'm thrilled about. I'm hoping to hit about 300 this year again. I'll probably be somewhere in that range because of my manga reading now. I definitely don't find it as difficult to hit high numbers. I'm feeling refreshed in the new year already, so I think we're on a good pace. So let's dive right in with our first chart. So let's talk about my age demographic breakdowns because I found this kind of interesting but not surprising. So I read 77% adult books, give or take. I'm rounding up here. I read 22% YA age demographic and 1% middle grade. I will note that I feel like my middle grade was really low last year, which is fine, but I would like to see that number go up in the new year. Then we can talk about format. So I think this one is also interesting because last year I read so much manga that we are seeing that reflected in the format breakdown now. So for that, I read 35% physical manga, 9% digitally, which is not surprising. I don't read a ton of my manga digitally. And then I read 1% comics, 3% graphic novels, 26% audio, and 26% ebook. I think the most fascinating stat here for me is the fact that 51% of my reading was audio and ebook, and those were split about 51, we'll say. Whatever, those two numbers added up together to be, I think it's 52. Whatever, you get my point. I think it's interesting that my audio and ebook split were so even. That has not happened in a long time. Usually audio is leaps and bounds ahead, but I do think last year I really didn't listen to nearly as many audiobooks, which I want to change again this year because again, it's a way of reading that I really love, and I could tell that my reading suffered for it, if that makes sense, when I was like picking my favorites and things this year. Then my genre breakdown, here's the chart so y'all can see it and read it for a minute here. All right, so I think this is interesting and also funny because shoujo manga was my biggest genre, which again tracks. I have narrowed in my tracking a little better for manga this year on my new spreadsheet, so I think that's gonna help a lot. But also, I think it's really funny that contemporary romance was second and paranormal romance was third on my biggest genres. I am, again, not surprised by these numbers really, but I am excited to see them shift next year because I'm already picking up genres that I didn't really read in 2022 as far as romance subgenres go, which is nice and refreshing. But I think it's also interesting because like I do feel like I have a lot of shonen on my shelves to read as far as my manga goes that I want to pick up in 2023, so I'm curious to see where this all shifts to next year. And then the next one is the length of books I read. So 44% of the books I read were manga length. So we're just going to include that to be anything basically under 300 pages. 27% was novel length and 25% was novella, which to me the interesting part here is that, and that's just like us highlighting like the top three, how close my novel and novella reading was, because again, I tend to read a lot of novellas. So the fact that I read as many novels as well as I did this year, and in fact read more of them than I did novellas, is really freaking exciting to me. I feel like I'm getting back into some of the longer length books and things like that as well. Next we have my publisher data, which I'm going to throw up here and just let y'all look at it for a minute. And honestly, the least surprising thing to me here is obviously a ton of manga publishers. I wasn't surprised to see who my top manga one was, that Kodansha had so many, but I was surprised at how high my self-published count was, which was like 31% of the books I read. I do realize that I read a lot of self-pub books, but I didn't realize exactly how many. I think last year that number was probably closer to 40% before I was reading more manga, but still, it's just an interesting thing to see. Like, I'm not reading nearly as much of the traditional titles as I think I am, And I always think that's weird because I feel like I'm reading more of them than I am. I hope that makes sense. Next we have books read per month. So this breaks down to about 20-ish on average, but the part of this chart that I found the most amusing is you can very clearly tell when 30 and 30 happens, because you can see in April and November that bar is like very far away from everything else on that chart. So that I thought was really, really interesting to see. Okay, and then outside of charts, my page count for 2022, I read about 71,640 last year. So like that's not bad. I would ideally love to at some point hit 100,000, like 100K. Like that'd be really, really cool. But it's also okay that I didn't. Like I'm not mad about it. So the way I tracked diversity last year is very different because I don't feel like it's an easy thing to track always. So I did check boxes. So I did underrepresented author, underrepresented character, and then I also checked if it was a manga, because technically my mangas are underrepresented in the US, if that makes sense. So those numbers break down to 62% of my reads were underrepresented authors, 58% were underrepresented characters, and 43% were manga. But if we take my manga out, 33% of my books read had underrepresented authors and 26% had underrepresented characters, give or take. I know that I did not check every single box, but I'm like pretty okay with that when we factor out my manga, because that's not that many books. So like that's a decent breakdown, but I do want to see myself reading more underrepresented identities in 2023. And that's the biggest thing I took away from this year is I was in a weird place with my reading, and I was picking up a lot of my same authors that I already love that are underrepresented and not as many new to me ones, which is something I really am changing seriously in 2023. So there's that. I think that's it for my interesting data, really. There's not a ton this year. I think my reading year was just, it was weird. That's all I got for you. I had a weird year in 2022. So on that note, let me know how many books you read in 2022. If you noticed any interesting stats or that, how you track your reading, I would love to know. And if you don't want to do that, leave me like a nerd emoji of your choice, because this video always makes me feel super nerdy, super duper nerdy. So you can do that in the comments, and I will have links to Be My Friend anywhere on the internet, as well as links to that video with my last year's setup for my spreadsheet. And I will talk to you all in just a few days. Bye.
To a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions, we'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow, we can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out, die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with me. Be free. Not looking